The 80s was a very exciting time in the ad business. It was a time of big creativity. In fact, everything was big. Big shoulders, big hair, big piles of drugs, big money, big everything. Big was big in the 80s.
It was in the midst of this era of unbridled bigness that Sudler was approached to create a new campaign, and Ernie Smith, who was creative director at the time and absolute genius and a friend of mine, he had this idea that would tap into the pulse and the energy of the era and create an iconic image that really no one had ever seen before.
A big, fat head. Sudler back then was a pretty competitive place. You know, Ernie was a guy who'd worked with people like George Lewis, and he'd seen Herb Lebalin in his heyday, and so I think there was a lot of competition inside the company to really do something different.
You see, up to this point, all the heads you saw in advertising were exclusively normal-sized. Automotive, normal-sized heads. Fashion, normal-sized heads. Tobacco, soft drinks, normal-sized heads, normal-sized heads. In fact, pharmaceutical advertising had some of the most normal-sized heads seen in advertising history up to that point.
There were a lot of big heads in pharma, but the idea that you would take one and hang an entire campaign on it was unheard of.
There's something almost Jungian in its archetypicality. It's instilled within us from our earliest memories, gazing up into the fat faces and fat heads of our mom and our dads. Well, initially the idea was obviously just to find a man with a big fat head, take his picture, stick it in the ad, you're done. And they looked. A couple of guys came close, but nothing of the enormity that Ernie had envisioned, you know?
Nowadays, with computers and digital technology, we can create anything pretty much that you can imagine. But in the 80s, we didn't have that option.
They tried computers, yeah they did. A couple of whiz kids at Sudler at the time attempted to generate the image using computation. The results were a bit too futuristic.
Ernie ultimately hired Carl Fisher, famous photographer, to produce the image.
Carl Fisher had created many iconic images for Esquire magazine, including famously drowning Andy Warhol in a tin of tomato soup. Ernie very wisely thought, if Carl can shrink a man down and get him into that tin, could he go the other way with a head?
Carl did it using a camera and prints. He would photograph the image, they would retouch it, and then rephotograph it, retouch it some more, and just continually enlarge it until they got that head as fat as Ernie wanted it. I remember the first time I saw this, I was like, that's great. Why didn't I think of that? Killing me.
Let's be serious, all right? It's the Mona Lisa of nasal decongestant advertising.
The ad still looks brilliant today. It's a fantastically wonderful, whimsical, iconic piece of material.
When it launched, it created a ripple felt around the world, not just in advertising, but in film, in television, music, global pop culture, even politics.
You know, it's not about fat heads, it's about big fat ideas, and nothing's changed about that.